If you'd like to go ahead and be turning in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, we will be continuing our study in that chapter this morning. Last week we began kind of a study of the middle part of the chapter there, and kind of the theme there, as you can see on our screen, is how that we are fellow workers with God. And that was basically what Paul was the point he was trying to get across in this part of the book, is how that he, Apollos, Peter, there was nothing really special about them. They were just fellow workers with God, and it was through God's power that anything that they accomplished was being accomplished, and it wasn't anything special about them. We saw last week where God provides the opportunity, and so Paul was stating there that there was nothing special about any of the circumstances there as far as he was concerned. It was just God opening those doors and providing those opportunities. And we see how that God opens doors for prepared workers. And that was a major point there. And then, of course, there was a good bit of discussion. Rodney brought up the point that God's not going to open a door for us that we don't find authority for in the Scriptures. And so that was a very good discussion there and a very good point, and one that we always need to remember. But God opens doors for those who are prepared to work for Him. We also saw how that those who search will find the truth. If you have someone who is honestly searching for the truth, then they will find the truth. Through God's providence, the providence of God is at work, and through His providence, then they will be able to discover and study and learn the truth. So all of these points are very important points, not only for the Corinthians to understand, but for us to understand today as well. As we concluded, or began to conclude the study last week, we were seeing how that God provides the increase, that it is our responsibility, it was Paul's responsibility to sow and to get the word out there, to spread the gospel, but God is going to provide the increase. The power is in the seed. So as we go through and we try to teach others and we try to share with them the gospel, we don't have to rely on our power, because the power is in the gospel. The power is in the seed. That is where the real power is at. And so that takes a lot of pressure off of you and I. That takes a lot of pressure, or took a lot of pressure off of Paul and the other apostles, because it was God that was providing the increase, and the power was in the Word. And as we concluded there, we began to look at the place of the sower. What is the place of the person who is sowing? We are really nothing, just seed throwers and water boys. That's our place. And so we shouldn't elevate anyone's station, especially ours, or no one's station, above just a seed thrower or a water boy. What did Paul say there in verse 7? So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. And so you look at the language in the first part of that verse, so neither he who plants is anything. So it sounds to me like Paul is stating there that we can't take really any credit at all, because we are nothing. We're seed throwers and water boys. And we talked a little bit about going and planting a garden last week, and how that putting that seed in the ground, and there's, and almost seems like magic in that seed, for that seed to grow and to put out roots and to be able to grow and produce fruit. And we really have nothing to do with that. It's God who's doing that. So the power is in the seed. We as sowers are just seed throwers, and we just are water boys. I came across a meme this past week, and I thought it really kind of illustrated this point, and even how that there are issues with it today. with a lot of people. And this one in particular, as you can see, has to do with the Catholic Church. And this is, of course, the Pope has a Twitter account. So anybody of any reputation has a Twitter account today. So this is from the Pope's Twitter account. And this was actually from 5 years ago, but these things kind of make their rounds and resurface. And this has here recently. But the Pope tweeted that Christians and Muslims are brothers and sisters, and we must act as such. So Christians and Muslims, this is what the Pope is stating. And this is supposed to be, according to the Catholics, God's representative here on earth. You know, he's stating that we are brothers and sisters with the Muslims, with those who follow Islam. And so in a response to that, we have this other gentleman that says, why don't you ask Muslims to convert to Christianity? Please read John 14 and verse 6. And if you remember, John 14 and verse 6 says, you know, there Christ is stating, I am the truth and the life. You know, no one comes to the Father except by me. You know, those who follow Islam, they're trying to come to the Father by another route other than Christ. But this guy, he's telling the Pope, well, you need to go read the Bible. And the Bible tells you that what you're saying is wrong. Well, in response to this, you have this other guy, and he said, did you seriously just ask the Pope to read the Bible? The audacity of this guy to ask the Pope to read the Bible. And I actually went to the Twitter account and read the feed, and the response of the guy right under that was, yes, I did. But what somebody did is they took this, and this is what was being shared. They took this, and they were making fun of this guy for having the audacity to tell the Pope he needed to go read the Scriptures. But that was not his place to read the Scripture, or to tell the Pope he needed to check his sources, basically. And so, as you read the thread that this was posted in, I mean, it was just comment after comment after comment, ridiculing this man for questioning the Pope. And, you know, others that they were stating that, you know, they were really downing what they would call hardcore Catholics who were kind of, you know, they were bucking up against what the Pope was doing. And if you follow any of that, you know, the Pope is trying to you know, to bring in homosexuality and things like that into the Catholic Church. And so there's some of the hardcore Catholics that are against that. And one thing I read is that they don't really consider him to be a true Pope. But, you know, you back all of this back up to what Paul was stating in 1 Corinthians 3, you know, where they were following Paul, Apollos, and Cephas, Cephas being Peter. Peter, from what I understand, is who they believe is the first Pope. And then Paul stating here that these men are nothing. But today we have people being ridiculed for questioning a man. And so these things are still alive and well today. People are following men, and if you have the audacity to question these people, you get ridiculed. You get thrown up and blasted all over social media. I don't know who this guy was that questioned him, but I applaud him. I applaud him for having the fortitude to question somebody as powerful as the Pope. And we need to question everyone, whether it's the Pope, whether it's the president, whether it's the preacher, whether, you know, me. It doesn't matter who it is. We need to search. We need to question. We need to hold every man accountable. And we hold them accountable to the Scriptures. And there is nothing wrong with telling anyone, why don't you go here and read this passage? Nothing at all wrong with that. And so we need to understand that neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but it's God. God who gives the increase. And you go back, and the only way, in the previous studies, the last 2 weeks, the only way we can know God's will is through His Word, through what is revealed. We can't guess that. I can't guess what God is thinking right now. I can't guess what any of you are thinking right now. So the only way we can know what God wants us to do is to go to His Word. The only way we can know if God wants us to accept Muslims as our brothers and sisters is to go to His Word. And when we do that, when we go to John 14 and verse 6, we can see that definitely they are not. And that's not the only passage. Does anybody have any comments or anything along those lines? From what I saw, he didn't. I don't think he really delves into, because you know what it's like when you get into the comment section online. There's just a lot of trash, really. And so I think he just makes his statements and just leaves it out there.
What he would say is his voice is above the scriptures. They have 3 sources. They believe in this Bible we've got. They've got one themselves, and then he's God's spokesman on earth. And so he would just, that's just flying in the face of nothing, because he speaks for God. He is God's representative on earth. And so, that appeal to the scriptures, is when we debate them, you have to start with do you believe in the inspiration of the scriptures? All the debates start there, because otherwise you're just talking in the wind, because he thinks he is God. He thinks he's been elevated above the scriptures.
Am I right in saying that he's really not supposed to go against what other popes have said in the past, or are they able to change? They don't really care now. Yeah. But he's shaking it up, and they believe he's God on earth, I guess. Yeah. Any other comments?
We have the responsibility to tell people they need to use the Bible.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Your comment was based on something else, but there's nothing wrong with it. But it's also a responsibility that we have commanded.
Yeah.
That we direct people towards the Bible.
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
And they are in the same boat, really. I understand the comments he's making there.
Yeah.
The man, he may be a Christian, I don't know. But as the world sees it, really, them people right there are in the same boat. They are brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
They on the other side, they don't view
Yeah.
what we do.
Yeah.
I know you're not making up what I am.
Yeah.
I know we understand that, but I just want to take that forward.
Yeah.
They're all lost, and that guy's a member of his denomination. He's just as good as the Muslims.
Yeah, that's true. Any other comments? Another thing that we can understand from the scriptures is that God can even use what we might term as defective seed throwers. He can use us. He can use His Word no matter who is putting it out there. When we look at Philippians chapter 1, verses 15 through 18, there it says, "Some indeed preach Christ even from envy and strife, and some also from goodwill. The former preach Christ from selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my chains, but the latter out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and in this I rejoice, yes, and will rejoice." And so here we see that some are preaching Christ out of envy and strife, and some out of goodwill, but it seems that God is using all of it for His purpose. And maybe we just saw an example out of that. Maybe this guy was, that we saw that questioned the Pope, maybe he had ulterior motives. We don't know, but if he did, his point was valid. And we can learn from that, no matter what his motive was. And so He can use us no matter really what condition we're in. Now we don't want to use that as an excuse to stay in a bad condition, but but He can use us. And therefore, we need to gain courage from that. And we need to strive, of course, to improve ourselves every day. But we shouldn't be using that as an excuse not to be trying to spread His word. He used Paul as we back up into chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. It says, I was with you in weakness and fear and much trembling, and my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. And so here Paul is stating that while he was there, that he wasn't really, I don't know if he was stating maybe he wasn't at his best, but from a worldly standpoint, he didn't look like much. He didn't seem like much because he was weak. There was weakness, there was fear, there was trembling. His speech wasn't that great, but yet God used him to establish this church there in Corinth. And, you could see God's power by using Paul there in that situation. So we must stop making excuses for not doing whatever we can when we can. And you look at the parable of the talents there in Matthew chapter 25, and we see this illustrated where these different men were given these different amounts of talents, a different amount of money maybe at that time, but one went or two of them went and they used those things and they doubled them, and the other one, he didn't use what he was given. He wasn't given near as much as the others, but what he was given, he didn't even use. And so when the master came back, he had some very harsh words for him. And there at the conclusion of that parable there in verse 29, it says, for to everyone who has, more will be given, but he will have abundance, but from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And so that passage in context, as you would read it there with that parable, is stating that we need to be using what we have, or God, even if it's a small amount, because if we're not using that, God's going to even take that away from us. And so we need to be ready to work for God, no matter what our abilities are, and just let Him use us to further the cross of Christ. Any other comments along that line? We can also see that God provides the reward, and that reward is provided according to our labor. God will reward each one according to their labor. There in verse 8 it says again, now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor. And so while both the planter and the waterer are one in the sense that they are both, they're both working towards the same goal. They have the same goal. They are working towards the same end. They are one in that, yet they will both answer to God independently. And so, we all strive to be one in our goal. Our goal is for us all to get to heaven and to take as many people with us as possible. That's our goal. But yet each one of us is going to answer to God independently. And we will each receive our own reward. The reward will each be according to our own labor. And one notable thing here is that Paul is emphasizing the labor and not the results. The emphasis is on the labor. The more we sow, the more we will reap. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7, do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. And so, if we are not sowing, we can't expect to reap anything. If we are only sowing a little bit, we can't necessarily expect to reap a lot. The more we sow, the more we will reap. The more we put God's word out there, the more good it is going to be doing. And those we lead to Christ will be a reward in and of itself. They will be a source of great joy for us. 3 John chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, it says, "For I rejoice greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you. Just as you walk in the truth, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth." So here we see, what he's stating here is that, there is no greater joy on earth than to see someone living a godly life that you help to teach. No greater joy. You think about maybe children, your children that are faithful Christians. That's a great joy. You maybe think about a coworker that you help to teach that. That's a great joy. I mean, really, when you get down to it, there is no greater joy than knowing that God used you to bring this person to Him. The key is to build upon the right foundation. As we go back to 1 Corinthians 3, verses 9 through 11, and so it says, "For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field. You are God's building. According to the grace of God, which was given to me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another builds on it. But let each one take heed how he builds. For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ." There's only one foundation that we can use to build, and that is Christ. If we use any other foundation, then the building that is going to be a result of that is going to be something drastically different. Rodney was talking about the Catholic Church and all those false doctrines that they have within it. It's built on the wrong foundation. You see other denominations, even just right down the road from this building, either way, and you'll see buildings or figurative buildings that are being built or were built on the wrong foundation. So we must start with the proper foundation, and therefore the result will be the correct building. Any comments or anything along those lines?
Every Christian could use that right there. It'd be a great help for the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm. Another point that Paul makes here is that God will provide the reward even if our work is lost, so to speak. Even if our efforts to bring this person to Christ does not have a favorable result, God provides a reward for our labor. The materials in which we use to build upon this foundation will vary. He says there in verse 12, it says, "Now if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw." And so as we begin to build, and what we're talking about here is as we go and maybe we see this prospect, and we're not really sure if this is going to be a good prospect, if they're going to accept it, if maybe they're not. Maybe they do accept it in the beginning, but then eventually fall away. We can't know. There's no way to know. Only time and judgment will reveal the true quality of that person, of that prospect. There in verse 13 it says, "Each one's work will become clear, for the day will declare it." And I believe he's talking about the judgment day there. The day will declare it because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test each one's work of what sort it is. So upon the day of judgment, then it will be clear. We understand that day, each one of us, every human being that has ever lived will stand before God in judgment, and God will pronounce, He'll bring into the open all those things, and He'll let us know if we were gold, if we were straw, if we were wood. He's going to let us know on that day. There's a lot of false doctrine promoted from these passages here. But as we've said before, sometimes when we when we have a passage maybe that we're struggling with, we need to go back, we need to read context, maybe before and after. And, if we go ahead into chapter 4 and verse 5, this passage here kind of clears it up for us. It says, therefore, judge nothing before the time until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the hidden things of the darkness and reveal the counsels of the heart. Then each one's praise will come from God. So on that day, it'll be clear because God is going to judge. He's going to bring to light the hidden things. And then we will know. Whether or not our work will endure will not ultimately be revealed until the day of judgment. We really won't know until the day of judgment. As I was looking, as far as studying on this passage, I went to Matthew Henry's commentary, and I just want to read what he says about this passage. He says, the expression carries in it a plain allusion to the refiner's art, in which the fire separates and distinguishes the dross from the gold and silver, as it also will silver and gold and precious stones that will endure the fire, from wood, hay, and stubble that will be consumed in it. Note, there is a day coming that will as nicely distinguish one man from another, and one man's work from another's, as the fire distinguishes gold from dross, or metal that will bear the fire from the other materials that will be consumed in it. In that day, some men's work will abide the trial, will be found standing. It will appear that they not only held the foundation, but they built regularly and well upon it, that they laid on proper materials and in due form and order. The foundation and the superstructure were all of a piece. The foundation truths and those that had a manifest connection with them were taught together. It may not be so easy to discern this connection now, nor know what works will abide the trial then, but that day will make a full discovery, and such a builder cannot fail of a reward. He will have praise and honor in that day, and eternal recompense after it. Note, fidelity in the ministers of Christ will meet with a full and ample reward in the future life. Those who spread true and pure religion in all branches of it, and whose work will abide in the great day, shall receive a reward, and how great, how much exceeding their deserts.
Couldn't you say most all that is dealing with the Word of God?
Mm-hmm. And so as we are building, we are endeavoring to build a structure that's going to withstand fire. That's a little different in how we build today. This structure here was not built to withstand fire. If it was, there wouldn't be so much wood here. And so today, when we build in the hopes that it will never have to face the fire. But when we build upon the foundation of Christ, we build knowing that whatever we build is going to be tested by fire. And so we need to build with an eye towards that so that it can withstand the fire and not be consumed by it. And if our work endures to the end, there will be great reward, great joy. As we continue reading there in chapter 3, it says, if anyone's work which he has built on it endures, he will receive a reward. If our work does not endure, we can still be saved. Verse 15, if anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. So we may be like Jeremiah, who served for years, and really we feel we have very little to show for it. But the Lord knows the efforts that we put forth, and He will reward us for those efforts. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58 says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Your labor is not in vain. No matter if we see results from that labor here, or maybe we don't. Our labor is not in vain. We too will face the test of fire. Our personal test relies on our willingness to build. If we're not willing to try to build, then we are not going to withstand the test. We're going to be burned. But yet, even if we do have this desire and we put forth these efforts to build, even if those that we do endeavor to convert, they do not pass the test, we can still be rewarded for our efforts if we endure. It is our obligation to spread the word, even if others will not listen. You know, this concept reminded me of Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 17 through 21. It says there, Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. Therefore hear a word from my mouth and give them a warning from me. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and give him no warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. Again, when a righteous man turns from his righteousness and commits iniquity, and I lay a stumbling block before him, he shall die because you did not give him warning. He shall die in his sin, and his righteousness which he has done shall not be remembered, but his blood I will require at your hand. Nevertheless, if you warn the righteous man that the righteous should not sin, and he does not sin, he shall surely live because he took warning. Also you will have delivered your soul. That's a very sobering passage there. When we read that in connection to what we're talking about this morning, it's a very sobering passage, and one that we need to dwell upon as far as our responsibility toward those who do not know God. They may never turn from God or from their evil way, but we still have to try. It's our responsibility. Any other comments there?
Read something. It really reminds me of men like Brother Hall, and we need to encourage them with all the work that they do. I asked, have I understood correctly that through all our conversations that only one person has obeyed the gospel in all those years? This is a 40-year period. If you go all the way back, the person said, starting from my personal work in the 80s, only 10. 40 years. And over the last 7 or 8 years, not one. So I've done about 1,000 studies with non-Christians without any conversions or anything. And he says, that was pretty discouraging for me. And I wrote back, I'm sure it was discouraging and probably still is. At times, it's hard sometimes to remember we're only sowers. And equally important to remember to let God define success, and that the living and powerful word, Hebrews 4:12, always accomplishes its purpose, Isaiah 58:11. So those 1,000 studies you referenced accomplished exactly what God would have them accomplish, which means you, the sower, batted 1,000, and the word batted 1,000. The person wrote back, you are very correct. It's God's job to give the increase. We can't make them. They have free will. That's what he said. So they need, be out there working, seem like nothing, just goodness, nothing's going right. But they forget that you're just a sower, man.
Just a sower.
That's all,
Ron didn't have to write that. He just went right along, everything been just good with him, but it was good that he wrote that.
Yeah.
I was appreciative of it. I bet you it was encouraging to him.
Yeah.
That he heard that.
Yeah, definitely. And so, there's a lot, those 1,000 people, it might be just like what it appears. They may have never obeyed the gospel, but there might have been one or two maybe in a situation that this brother didn't know about. That maybe they moved off somewhere else and remembered and was put in. We just don't know. But whether or not there was no results, it doesn't matter.
The word bats 1,000.
The word bats
It's
1,000.
perfect. When you hear it, it bats 1,000 every time.
Yeah. So that's our responsibility. Any other comments?
When's the last time a family that read the gospel got membership in this congregation?
We can ask those questions, but ultimately it's our responsibility to try.
I'm not saying we don't do work.
Yeah.
By no means.
We shouldn't let that discourage us.
It's been decades.
Any other comments? As we move on, we look in verses 16 and 17, and we see this idea of destroying the temple of God. There in verse 16 it says, "Do you not know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are." So the temple of God is holy, and the Corinthians were the temple of God. And so we ask the question, well, what is the temple of God? Well, I believe there are a couple of ways we can look at it. The first one being the church. The church is a temple of God. Earlier in the chapter, Paul states in verse 9, "For we are God's fellow workers, you are God's field, you are God's building." And so he's speaking to the church there at Corinth, and he's telling them, you are God's building, you are God's temple in the sort. The same language is used other places in the New Testament. We look at Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 through 21. It says, "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fitted together grows into a holy temple in the Lord." Also 1 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. He says, "Coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious, you also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." And so I believe rightly we could say that the church is a temple of God. But I also believe that we can say that we as individual Christians, by extension, can also be considered a temple of God. We look in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 19. It says, "Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own?" And then 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 16, or 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 16. "And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people." And so as you read these passages, and I was discussing this with George earlier in the week, and I asked him, I said there in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, do you believe that he's talking about the church being the temple there or the individual being the temple there? Because I kind of read it from both directions. And he says, well, I think it's both. He said, "I'm both." And I said, I guess you're right. Because I look at it one way, and then you read commentators that said it's an individual, you read commentators that said it's the church, and I'm thinking, I don't know that we can tell. And I think the reason is because it's referring to both. The church is the temple of God. I'm not talking about this wooden structure that we have here. I'm talking about we, the members of this congregation. Now, earlier in the year, we were meeting outside in the parking lot. Were we meeting outside the temple of God? No. We were the temple of God in the parking lot. If we were to go out under the shade tree, we would still be the temple of God. The temple is not the building. The temple is the people, and God dwells within the temple, and by extension, He dwells within each one of us. And so we are the temple of God. And we could get into a long, drawn out study, and it might be a good study, probably. I know it is. And I know there's been comments and everything as far as indwelling and things of that nature. But I believe You know, in order to really understand the the truth on those questions, what we need to do is just read the scriptures and accept it. And I can't tell you that I understand this whole concept because I really don't. But what I can do is read passages that tell me things and just say, okay, that's what it says. That's what I accept. I think we can all do that. And so we're out of time, and so we'll cut off there. I've got a little bit more I want to say here about verses 16 and 17. We're going to look at, Lord willing, next week how the definitions of defiling and destroying, and how that we even today can defile and destroy the temple. And so, Lord willing, that's where we'll pick up next week in verses 16 and 17. We will probably finish chapter 3 and move in some into chapter 4 as well. So I appreciate everyone's attention, your comments, those who have made comments, I appreciate those. And we'll go ahead and swap things around here, and in just a few moments go right into our song service.